Today we're going to talk to you net managers about preparing your simulated emergency test operations in the Ohio section. See how you can get the most out of your net operations this year. Stick around. Net managers play an important role in making sure that amateur radio communications work, in emergency conditions in particular. So the simulated emergency test that is held every year, we talked about in earlier videos, and we talked about specifically the advice we give to emergency coordinators, those who run the local amateur radio emergency service in the county. So the net managers have an important duty in all of this. Let's take a look just real quick at the SET. There are three goals of the SET. The first is to determine strengths and weaknesses of our operations. The second is to provide a demonstration of our capabilities. And the third is to give operating experience to the volunteers who will need to do that job in the event that they're facing a communications emergency. So 6 things we're going to cover today. Register, receive an activation, establish the roles, establish a schedule, mobilize and demobilize, and then, of course, report. First, register. If you are looking to be able to play in the exercise, it's important that you have people coming to the net. Registering your net operations is going to help the controllers of the Black Swan exercise, which we are using in the Ohio section, to make sure that we know you're out there, to know what your hours of operation are, what your modes of operation are, and so on. We've got some information from the nets throughout the Ohio section from a few weeks ago as part of our County Information Report project, but we are looking for more information that will help us to get a better idea of how to coordinate should that need arise. Next is to receive an activation. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, that's something that an agency does, to call the ARRL group. Why is it that I, as a net manager, need to think about activation? Well, when we're talking about activation, we're talking about making sure that we are in operation when we're needed. Activation is not just an ARRL thing. The National Traffic System exists for the purpose of communicating on behalf of ARRLs. That comes straight from the NTS Manual, Chapter 4. So this is not something that is a distinct, separate service. NTS is there for the purpose of relaying third-party traffic. ARRL's operators, as we discussed in earlier videos, have the job of originating and of delivering traffic. NTS exists for the purpose of relaying that traffic, and that's what these nets are all about. So the question is, how does your net activate? Emergencies do not wait until net time to happen. So you need to make sure that you have the ability to get on the air and to get your operations underway when the area's operators need you. So reach out to the emergency coordinators in your area. Find out what it is that they're going to be doing, what their hours of operation are for this exercise. Make sure that they have a way of getting a hold of you so that when they have a need for service, you're there to provide it. Now, the activation procedure doesn't need to be complicated. It can be a simple matter of just having a conversation and finding out what kind of service you can provide, what your coverage area is, whether you can move digital, whether you're going to do everything by voice, if you've got CW operations, whatever you've got. You can use the report card from the Ohio Section ARRL's District Emergency Coordinator and Emergency Coordinator reports to see who the present ECs are, and that's probably the easiest way to find who the Emergency Coordinator is in any given county, or the District Emergency Coordinator is for any of the districts. So make sure that you know who your EC is, and also your DEC. Make sure they know who you are and what service you're able to provide. Establishing roles is obviously important for any kind of a net operation, and this is something that you already understand because you've got to run nets all the time. So you're going to have liaisons, of course, or reps that are in the section. So you should expect that during the SET, we're going to be dealing with some operators who don't do this all the time. So it's important to make sure that you're going to be patient, that your operators are patient, that they're able to help the originators to get the messages listed properly, to get them moved properly. And so you also need to recognize their operating conditions include the stack of traffic that they've got and the fact that they don't have all day to move it. They're going to have to get back to the net that they came from, and so they might need to come to the net, unload the traffic, and get out of there. So you might need to pass those messages to somebody who is able to hold them on the net until you've got an outlet for them. So don't be too spun up about the way that you're going to have to get something from one station to another. Be flexible about it and just make sure that you keep that traffic in play. Your net sessions, if you run once daily, twice daily, once weekly, whatever it is, will not get the job done when we're talking about an emergency operation. So the conditions are going to require that you've probably got extra sessions. You might need to have relay stations. Part of this exercise is going to include simplex-only operations. So make sure that you do have the system of relay in place to keep that net connected, even if you don't have a large footprint repeater to operate from. You also, by virtue of being the net manager, you understand what the capabilities of your net are. You probably do not have 100 operators, all of them squared away, able to take net control, able to subnet, able to liaise to other nets, and so on. So you need to set some expectations. It's important that we do test ourselves, so we want to push our limits, but we also want to make sure that we have some successes along the way so that the newer operators are able to accomplish some basic tasks, understand what they have done, see how it fits into the bigger picture, feel good about that participation, and use it as a foundation to go for more training in the coming year so they'll be more capable when it comes to next year. Liaisons, of course, that you're going to need. You know how your net is going to need to route. But make sure that you are not just assuming that it is as it always has been. Conversations with the ECs, with the DECs, will help to make sure that you understand not just what you normally do, but what you might need to do in an emergency, and in particular, the SET. Next up is to establish the schedule. You know how this works in any case, and you have a schedule for your net normally. During a disaster response or an emergency, that's not going to get the job done. So the simulated emergency test is going to mean that you need to get some schedule put in place that's going to have extra sessions, maybe long sessions. When you start getting into the complexity of needing a net control operator, you start talking about, oh, maybe I need to have somebody who's going to liaise to another net. So you're going to have to look at the balance of operators that you have and requirements that you have to be able to make those things fit together and have a realistic schedule. Shifts of 4 hours are really long, especially if you're talking about a traffic net. So here's an example of something that we did in Central Ohio Traffic Net last year. The basic premise was that at the top of every hour, we would call the net. We had a different net control operator scheduled for each hour. The net would be called, all the traffic would be moved, and if there was still any time left in the hour, then the net control operator would change the net state from directed to free, but the net control operator, the liaison, and any relay stations that were assigned would stay on the frequency. That way, anybody who came to the net with traffic was able to move it right away. By having a new net start every hour, we were able to make sure that we didn't have people staying on for hours on end. Anybody who was able to contribute even a small amount of time, we're able to work with them. We could take advantage of what they were able to bring. They were able to get some good training out of it. In some cases, we would have a station that would be on for an hour, off for an hour, and back. And we did have a couple of spots that were open. We did not actually get them filled before the net started. Again, as traffic was moving, then we did have the ability for operators to work collaboratively, and so those gaps did in fact get filled in, and it was done by the operators working together. The net control stations able to talk to one another when traffic was not moving to determine when the next net would be able to get started, who would take care of that. And so we did have continuous coverage, and it was very, very nice to see. This might be an example of something that could work in your net. if you have the operators for it and if you're trained for it. So be realistic about what you're going to do and make sure that it does fit both the need that your organizations that you support have, as well as what the operators are able to provide. Again, remember the goals of the SET. Determine the strengths and weaknesses. Get some wins in there. Make sure that people are able to do some of the things that are needed and they're able to see that they can have an impact. But do not shy away from those things where people are reaching and trying to do something and they're probably not going to do it properly. Don't worry about that. It's the purpose of an exercise. Second, providing a public demonstration. We cannot demonstrate that we have the ability to operate effectively in an emergency if we stand the net up, have everybody check in, pass no messages, or maybe pass one or two, and then call it a day and go home. That's not going to work either. So we need to demonstrate that we have the ability with these nets to support the operators who are being called into emergency positions to be able to support those agencies that need us when communications have failed. Third, getting operational experience. Very, very important, and there's no amount of online study, there's no amount of test taking that can replace the experience that comes from operating. So when you have a net and you're assigning those roles, take a look at what experience people have. Give them an opportunity to get into roles that maybe they have not covered before. Help them to learn new skills, to become better rounded operators, and again, that will help them to be more effective as they are developing their skill set and how well they can operate in the event of an emergency that happens at some point in the future. And of course, we get into mobilization, demobilization. This is very different for us when we're talking about net managers as opposed to emergency coordinators. As a rule, the emergency coordinator is concerned about this issue, getting people onto the sites necessary to be able to run those operations. We, on the nets, however, tend to stay in place. So we are the ones that are going to be operating from home stations or some place that is advantageous for the purpose of relay, but is not generally going to be as involved with moving people around and so on. So the thing that we're going to be doing this year is, because of the concerns about COVID, we are going to have each of the sites be virtual. So all of the sites are going to have their ARRL operators, their medical staff, their emergency managers, and so on will be in a Google Meet. It will be a video conference where, as if they are all together, they'll be able to talk to one another. And so when we have the nets in operation, then if you are going to have a net operator, they're going to be in a Google Meet. The important thing is to make sure we don't use those to go cross-site and start routing through there. The point with those conferences is to make sure that people are able to work as if face-to-face, but the only way that we are going to move exercise messages from one site to another is by radio, and that probably means it's going to be over a net like yours. So make sure that we have all of those pieces put together, people understand what they're doing, and finally, we need to report. That's a big part of what these exercises are all about. It doesn't do us a lot of good to run through these if we don't stop and write down what went well, what did not go well, and to record the kinds of things that help us to assess ourselves in quantitative terms. The League is interested in hearing from us. The Form B is the form for net managers. Many people have said that Form A is for ARRLs, Form B is for NTS. This is not true. If you are a net manager for an ARRLs net, Form B is for you. Form A is there. It does exist for a reason, but that's the emergency coordinator's job. Now, if you happen to be both the emergency coordinator and the net manager, then you're going to need to complete Form A and Form B. Again, as a way to show how these things fit together, in Form B, we will get credit for the relay of traffic from one station to another, a radio message going from a radio station to another radio station. There is no credit for origination, that is, taking a message and turning it into radio format. There is no point awarded for delivery, which is taking the radio message and putting it into a form that a person is going to consume. Those are things that you get credit for only in Form A. To do the job for served agencies means we must originate credit on Form A, we must relay credit on Form B, we must deliver, again, credit on Form A. Both of these things are necessary to show how we're getting that job done. Do not skip the important job of reporting. Now is the time to ready the teams. You don't need to know the details about the mission to make the schedule. You already know that something is going to be happening. It's going to be the first full week of October, so do make sure that you're planning now. How many operators do you have? How many net control stations do you have? On what schedule are you able to have them operate? Be familiar with what the exercise is all about. The Black Swan ComX site is going to include all of that kind of information. So it's going to tell you what you need to know to understand generally what we're doing, even though you don't know the scenario that comes out of it. By readying the team now, you're also going to get into the question about how you're going to route messages. If you are a local net, you are going to need to liaise to higher level nets. Does that mean you're a county net and you need to liaise to a district? Are you a district and you need to liaise to the section? Are you a county where there is no district, in which case you need to liaise directly to the section? In any case, you need to know what those outlets are so that you can get onto the proper nets and move them. To get a message from Franklin County, for example, to Cuyahoga County is going to require a couple of different hops. We're not going to have those two talking directly to each other. So we're going to have something in Franklin County is going to go to a district net, District 7, and then it's going to go from the District 7 net up to the section and then back down to a local net where it can be delivered in Cuyahoga. This is exactly the same thing we've been doing in the County Information Report, Project 20. And that's the reason why we've been doing that for the past 10 weeks, is to prepare operators for originating, relaying, and delivering messages just like they would need to do in a real emergency, just like we're going to measure during the SET. So the capabilities that we have in the various nets around the Ohio section are going to affect the way that we are able to route things. If, for example, you have a message that has been originated, it is in digital form, and it is in a complex form. It's not going to be something that you can put into a radiogram or even an ICS 213 that can voice easily. The question is going to be, how do we get it done? If it's complicated, you're going to have to move it digitally. So are you going to be able to get onto an NBEMS net to get that done? Or are you going to find some other way? Are you going to have to re-originate, encapsulating it into a radiogram and so on? You need to understand what your options are if you're going to be able to get that job done effectively. Again, get the team ready. NBEMS is where it's at when it comes to being able to move these messages point to point, even when we're talking about doing so through manual relay nets. The Buckeye net is going to be where we're able to do this in the Ohio section. This is a multi-mode net that we're talking about, not the CW sessions, but in the multi-mode Buckeye net, we have signal operating instructions, and that's going to give us a number of frequencies that we're going to be using. And so we also have, to make things easier, a set of macros that will work in FLDigi. The idea is that you join that net by voice. You can list traffic if you have it, or advise what district you're representing or what county you're representing, and net control will tell you that you need to move to one frequency or to another. This is all going to be channelized, so you don't have to get into things like how far off you move and so on. Net control tells you, go down to 80, F4, take 1 for whatever. You know exactly where to go, and all you got to do is hit the button, and you'll be on the proper frequency and ready to move. So do make sure that you're ready. So if you've got questions, if you want to practice, those are all good things. Make sure that you are coordinating with us. Number one, the County Information Report project is still going on. We still have objectives, and those objectives are becoming more and more realistic, more and more like the kinds of things that we'll need to do in a real emergency, and more like what we're going to be doing in the SET. As you can see, our performance is variable throughout the section. In some districts, they are killing it, and they've managed to get every county in their district to make things happen. In others, they're just not really there. So we're working with those to make sure that they can get connected with the rest of the system, because otherwise they're just disconnected. And from the perspective of being able to reach out to the rest of amateur radio to help them when they're dealing with a local emergency, they're cut off. If you're in a county that doesn't have the ability to radio message outside of your county up to your district, you cannot ask your DEC for help. If you're in a district and you can't get to the section, you can't ask the section for help. The whole point of this is to make sure that the people out there in the field closest to the event have the ability to bring in the resources necessary. It's not just a matter of what capabilities exist within a particular county. It's all about the system, all of us together representing a force that's able to communicate effectively. The nets are how we tie these pieces together, and that's why the net managers are so important, and it's critical for each one of us who run a net to reach out to our ECs, to our DECs, and make sure that we have the ability to tie them all together effectively. So that's it. Register, receive activation, establish roles, establish a schedule, know how to mobilize, demobilize that you might need, and then to issue that report. Now, if you've got questions, please do reach out to me. We've got a couple of weeks to go before we get into the SET. First full weekend of October. We don't have a lot of time to goof around, so ask questions now if you have them. You can get a hold of me very easily. I am KD8TTE. Send me WinLink. You can get a radiogram to me, KD8TTE in Bexley. And of course, you can send internet email, KD8TTE@pm.me. I hope that you have found this helpful and it's able to get you directed in the right way so that you can have a good experience during SET. You're able to demonstrate the capability of tying all those stations together and the power that we have when we are able to work together to get that mission done. I'll see you next time. Radio KD8TTE out.